I want to tell you about 2 legendary Pokemon that are fundamentally awful at solo challenges. One of them goes beyond this. It is completely horrible, so much so that the run essentially becomes a shiny hunt. Here are the rules for the solo challenge, and they'll be in the description for later. Now, Latias and Latios immediately do not seem like they would be bad in the solo challenge format. After all, they are legendary Pokemon. They have cool signature moves, a great typing, and excellent base stats. 80 HP and 110 speed. Then Latias is the more defensively oriented Pokemon with 80 attack and 90 defense, 110 special attack, and 130 special defense, whereas Latios is the more offensively oriented Pokemon, having its defensive stats switched with its offensive stats. 90 attack, 80 defense, 130 special attack, and 110 special defense. Immediately looking at these two in a solo run, it seems obvious. Latios is just going to perform far better in a solo challenge because it's the offensive mon, whereas Latias is going to have a slight disadvantage because it's defensive. I think it stands to reason though that Latias might be able to perform almost identically just because its special attack is still outrageously good. The metric that really matters within Pokemon solo challenges and really within Pokemon in general is how many turns does it take your Pokemon to knock out the opposing Pokemon. If the number of turns it takes is the same, then it doesn't matter if your stats are slightly lower. Here's the thing though, this is all painting a deceptive picture for all of you, because it seems like Latios is just going to be better, right? And it would be if they started with the same moves. And this is where these solo challenges go all wrong. Latias starts with Psywave and Wish. So, Psywave is a terrible move if you don't already know. It inflicts damage, but this damage is based on your Pokemon's level. It deals between 1 damage and 1.5 times the Pokemon's level in damage. So right now the maximum damage roll I can get is 7 and the minimum damage roll I can get is 1. But Psywave also has 80% accuracy, so 4 out of 5 turns it's going to do damage, and 1 out of 5 turns it's just going to do nothing. Making this move even worse, it only has 15 PP, which for Latias at the beginning of the game is kind of an advantage, but for Latios, this is going to be a major drawback. Okay, Latias, I'm going to beat the rival. This is annoying because I have to use Psywave, but it's not that bad. With him taken care of, I have to find a wild Pokemon and use it to spam out all of the PP of Psywave and Wish. I need Struggle because the first trainer in the game who is mandatory is named Calvin, and his only Pokemon is a Poochyena, which is a mono dark type. When your Pokemon starts the game with only psychic type moves, he is a complete wall. Unlike in Generation 1 where Psywave bypasses type effectiveness, it no longer does that starting in Generation 2. So the only way for me to win here is with Struggle. Luckily, like I said, Psywave doesn't have much PP, so it doesn't take very long to spam it all out. Wish isn't much slower, it only takes 15 turns to get rid of all of it, and then I can crush Calvin using Struggle. For the next section of the game, I'm not going to visit Pokemon centers because I need to still be using Struggle. Although I am going to battle additional trainers because the next Pokemon that is a dark type is Poochyena inside of the forest on the Aqua Grunts team. It's level 9 and it also knows Sand Attack, so I don't want to go into that battle too underleveled. I also want to continue thinking beyond that battle. There's another Poochyena after Roxanne, but in order to defeat her, I'm going to need a decent level anyway. The only move I will still have access to is Psywave for direct damage, and with only 15 PP, I want to ensure that each turn I'm dealing significant damage to a rock-type Pokemon. There are 3 of them, and I don't think Struggle's a good idea to defeat her. The first 2 Geodude have 33 hit points, and the Nosepass has 37. In order to 2-shot the Geodudes, I need to be able to deal at least 17 damage per turn. Latias can pull this off with the maximum Psywave damage roll at level 11. That said, I'm not always going to be getting the maximum damage roll, so I want to level up even more than this. While I do that, let's go through the level up learn set that Latias has available to it. At 10, it gets Helping Hand, which is going to be just perfect for a solo challenge. Then it gets Safeguard at 15, which will have some uses in the later stages of the early game. And finally beyond that, it gets its first damage dealing move other than Psywave, which is Dragon Breath. Luckily, this move gets the same type attack bonus, and it's a special move, so it utilizes Latias's higher attacking stat. Beyond that, it gets Water Sport, Refresh, Mist Ball, its signature move, Psychic, Recover, and Charm. Unfortunately, I don't think any of these level up moves are going to be useful because I will have got better alternatives through TM and HM. If you just glance over at Latias's set, you can see that it gets so much diversity. The moves that you should draw your attention to are Dragon Claw, Calm Mind, Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, Earthquake, Psychic, Shadow Ball, Shockwave, and Aerial Ace. It also gets a lot of the HMs, so this thing is fantastic in terms of the coverage damage it has access to. And most of these moves are special, which is just fantastic. For this first Latias playthrough, I think I did overtrain. I go all the way to level 15. And then there's one more step that I want to take care of before I face Roxanne. That's to backtrack to the forest and find myself a cocoon Pokemon. I want to spam out both Helping Hand and Safeguard to ensure that if I run out of uses of Psywave, I can just use Wish, heal a bunch, and then use Struggle to knock out Roxanne's final Pokemon. The process of doing this takes me 1 minute and 28 seconds. So I'm going to be fighting Roxanne around the 20-minute mark in this playthrough, and I am playing the game on 4 times speed. When a legendary Pokemon takes this long to face the first gym leader, you know that it's not very good in a solo challenge. That said, the rest of the game should be more manageable for Latias, but first it has to get by Roxanne. Well, before I do that, I need to talk about the sponsor of this video, Raycon. The holidays are quickly approaching, and I don't know about you, but I'm normally trying to track down presents for everyone just around now. Luckily, you don't need to search anymore because Raycon's earbuds are the perfect gift. Actually, so much so, that is why they are a sponsor on this channel. A long time ago, my wife got me a pair and I ended up using them every day for years, until I recently upgraded to Raycon's new everyday earbuds. They have top tier audio quality and they're only half the price of the other big players in the industry. They have active noise cancellation, which is perfect for when your pets are making a lot of noise and you just need to focus. Also, the battery life is great, up to 32 hours of playback, and they also charge quickly. In case you're like my wife and you're using them at the gym, they're waterproof and sweat resistant. Raycon also offers a 30-day happiness guarantee, and that ensures that you are satisfied with your purchase. Click the link in the description below or go to buyraycon.com/scotsthoughts to get up to 25% off site-wide. That's right, you'll get up to 25% off everything on Raycon's website when you go to buyraycon.com/scotsthoughts. Thanks to Raycon for sponsoring this video. Now let's face Roxanne. Her first Geodude is level 12, I go for Psywave, doing about half to it, and then it strikes with Rock Tomb, lowering my speed. Now she's going to continue choosing this move as a way to speed control Latias until my speed goes below her Pokemon. First Geodude has 11, second Geodude has 9, and the Nose Pass has 17. So if I want the Nose Pass to use moves like Block, Harden, and Tackle, I will need to have my speed lowered to -3. It's not a problem though, because the first Geodude pulls this off. Also, Latias has no chance of losing here. It's taking so little damage, and I can always use Wish to restore my HP. Just in case you don't know how this move works, on the turn it's selected it does nothing, and then after the next turn is fully complete, it will heal your Pokemon by 50%. I use it on the second Geodude to restore my HP before I knock it out and move on to the Nose Pass. I have 3 uses of Psywave left, so I am really glad that I spammed out all the PP from Helping Hand and Safeguard. Psywave is not consistent enough to knock the Nose Pass out, so it ends up being the case that I have to spam out the remaining PP on Wish and then use Struggle. It's doing decent damage, and it finishes the Nose Pass off. Latias earns itself the first badge. But what about Latios? So this thing has a slow growth rate, Latias does too, I didn't mention that until now. But the big difference between these two is that Latios starts with Memento instead of Wish. Let me just quickly show you the Bulbapedia description of how Memento works in Generation 3. It causes the user to faint and in return lowers the attack and special attack of the target by 2 stages each. So it's a pretty good move if you have a team, but if you're doing a solo challenge, this is absolutely useless. You essentially just force yourself to either blackout or reset. But this move comes with a subtler problem. It has 10 PP, and there is no way for me to deplete all of this PP and then continue with Struggle. If I use Memento, my Latios faints. This either blacks me out or it leaves me with only HM users in my party. In the early game, there is no way to buy revives, so I can't revive Latios and then use the next PP of Memento. I can only ever deplete a single power point. Therefore, I cannot use Psywave to defeat Calvin's Poochyena. I'm kinda stuck. If I level up to 10, then ironically I get Helping Hand, which is really not helpful. Then I get Safeguard at 15, these are the same between the 2 Pokemon. And finally, at level 20, Latios will get Dragon Breath. This is a move that can knock out Calvin's Poochyena. Earlier in the year, I played the game with the Regis. They all start with Explosion, meaning they cannot defeat the rival's first Pokemon. You simply black out and you're stuck in the early game forever. It's a similar scenario, but with the Regis, they cannot do any training to level up in the early game, so they are truly stuck, earning themselves placements in the impossible tier. However, with Latios, it is possible. It's just extremely painful. I am going to have to knock out level 2, 3, and 4 Pokemon using Psywave until I level a slow growth rate Pokemon up to 20. Now you might say, why not just deplete Memento's PP with an artificial piece of software like Pokebite? Isn't that fair since this is what I did with the Reggies? Well, not really, because the Reggies are still in the impossible tier. I didn't rank them after depleting their PP, but Latios can beat the game when not having its PP artificially depleted. So in order to accurately rank it, I do need to go through this awful early game slog. Surrounding Oldale Town, there are 3 routes that I have access to: Route 101, 102, and 103. On Route 101, there are 3 Pokemon: Poochyena, which have a 45% chance to show up, Zigzagoon at 10%, and Wurmple at 45%. This isn't a great place to train since Poochyena are showing up almost 50% of the time, and I won't be able to damage them with Psywave. Route 103 is actually much worse. Poochyena show up 60% of the time, with Zigzagoon and Wingull both being a 20% chance encounter, so this is definitely not the location to go to either. Through the process of elimination, Route 102 ends up being the best, although Poochyena are still a 30% encounter. And I want to draw your attention to the fact that in Ruby and Sapphire, they are only a 15% chance in this location. Why in Emerald did the developers change this? It really makes things more frustrating for me today. So if you did this challenge in Ruby or Sapphire, it would actually be a little bit easier with Latios because more often Pokemon would show up that you can knock out. So what do I have available to me? Zigzagoon, Wurmple, Lotad, Seedot, which are a 1% chance encounter, and Ralts, which are a 4% chance encounter. Zigzagoon gives speed EVs, Wurmple give HP EVs, Lotad gives special defense EVs, Seedot gives defense EVs, and Ralts gives special attack EVs. So really my EV training is going to be spread out all over the place and it's not really going to synergize towards something coherent. Plus, I just need so many experience points, it does not make sense trying to pick and choose which Pokemon I knock out. This is already going to be an extremely long process. And once I get Dragon Breath at level 20, I think Latios is just going to stomp the next section of the game all the way up until Flannery. Alright, so this is what I was talking about. This is the run that is so bad that it becomes a shiny hunt. I am stuck in this tiny piece of grass fighting wild Pokemon. It is very rare for solo challenges to go like this. Okay, while I'm doing this, I'm going to talk about my natures. With both Latias and Latios, I am running a quiet nature which lowers my speed stat and improves my special attack stat. With 110 speed, these Pokemon are going to be faster than every significant target in the game, and I don't want to give up defensive stats if I can keep them. Now I think there's a good argument for a modest nature lowering my attack stat because I'm not going to be using physical moves with either of these Pokemon, at least that is currently my assumption. The only 2 that I could see having small niche uses would be Earthquake for Steven Stone or Shadow Ball potentially for Tate and Liza. Outside of that though, I have solutions for everything else. I've also given both of them Hidden Power Fire so that they can solve Steven Stone with a special move. Okay, back to the Latios playthrough. There is a little bit of strategy here in terms of how I'm training. Every time I run low on Psywave PP, I walk back to the center and manually heal. There is another way to do this. You can just continue fighting Pokemon, and when you encounter a Pokemon and you have no more uses of Psywave, I could simply use Memento, black out, and restore my PP this way. Are you ready for the pain? This is where I have to admit something. This is technically not my first Latios playthrough. I realized that the software I used for these runs was forcing Zigzagoon encounters on this route so that I was never running into Poochyena. That felt like I was cheating in this case, because I'm not trying to find my HM user, I'm trying to knock out Pokemon. And if every single one that I encounter is one that I can knock out, then it gives Latios an advantage. So I had to restart the playthrough after doing about 15 minutes of grinding on wild Pokemon. Now I ended up deleting that footage, and I probably shouldn't have, because I ended up doing a test while I was fighting those Zigzagoon. The test was, is it faster to black out using Memento to heal my PP, or is it faster to walk back to the Pokemon Center? And I found on average, it's faster to just walk back to the Pokemon Center. In order to use Memento, you have to go into a battle, and if you have like one use of Psywave left, you have to spam that out, potentially not one-shotting the Pokemon you're fighting. Well, mostly not one-shotting the Pokemon when you're at a lower level. That is going to change as I level up. So if I don't one-shot, then I deal damage, watch an HP bar deplete, and then I use Memento, have to watch all the blackout animation, and then I finally get to run back to this location and start training again. Whereas with my current strategy, if I look down and I see I have 3, 2, or 1 PP left on Psywave, I can choose not to fight another Pokemon knowing how inconsistent this move is. Go back to the Pokemon Center, heal up, and then the next non-Poochyena encounter I get will be useful. The way you can think about this in more simple terms is using Memento for the blackout strategy is just more inconsistent, whereas it's far more consistent to use Psywave. I think there are some scenarios where Memento ends up being slightly slightly faster, but in this case I just decided not to use it and grind with Psywave. Just so you're aware, it takes around 7 seconds in order to make the trip to the Pokemon Center, heal, and then go back to the grass to fight more Pokemon. This is why I said earlier Psywave's low PP is going to be a major disadvantage for Latios. It has to go back to the center so many times while I do this grind, over and over and over again. If Game Freak had just realized that Psywave is a terrible move, and they had given it like 25 or 35 PP, this section of the game would be much faster for Latios. Okay, if you are sensitive to visual stimuli and things flashing really quickly, please look away for the next little section of the video. I will give you an auditory reminder when it's okay and safe for you to look back at the screen. So I'm going to speed the footage up now, because this grind takes a really long time. And I mean a really long time. Initially when I sat down to play the run, I thought maybe it's going to take half hour, maybe 40 minutes, but I really underestimated just how slow growth rate Pokemon level up. Around 45 minutes on the clock, we're going to slow the footage back down so it's safe to watch. My Latios is now level 18. Still 2 more levels to go, and these last 2 levels take the majority of the time, because as I gain experience, I need more and more experience to hit the next level. And I just want to vent here, the Poochyena that are showing up are so frustrating. I wish these things didn't exist on one of the early routes in the game. If only there was a place where I could avoid this nuisance of a Pokemon. And yes, that is a shiny Poochyena. When it initially showed up, I had a moment of excitement. It was very brief, and then I realized I have already got a shiny Poochyena. I did a solo challenge with it on this channel. Why is this Pokemon so frustrating and annoying in this challenge specifically? It's not just the wall that is stopping Latios from going to the next section of the game, like out of the first 3 routes. It is also the Pokemon that I can't knock out for experience. And now it is my first duplicate shiny on the channel. Why couldn't have I got a shiny like Wurmple? It has a really cool purple shiny, and Wurmple is a 30% chance encounter on this route, just like Poochyena. Anyway, I wasn't bitter enough to not try and catch it. You will notice in my inventory I have 16 Pokeballs and 1 Premier Ball. The reason was that I bought these in anticipation of a potential shiny showing up. I knew I was going to have to train for such a long period of time. So I should have enough balls to be able to catch this weak early game Pokemon. And with my first Pokeball, I do. My last Poochyena was named Kyle. This one's a female, so that's good. I'm going to name it Kylie. Maybe I'll have to do a solo challenge with this one in Fire Red or something like that. Let me know what you think I should do with this Poochyena in the comments. Okay, so will I run into shinies before level 20? The answer is no. Finally, at long last, Latios knocks out the final Lotad, levels up to 20, and gets access to Dragon Breath, which I teach in the place of Memento. It took me 55 minutes and 22 seconds to get a move to fight Poochyena with, and now I can obliterate youngster Calvin, which is incredibly satisfying. Okay, Roxanne. Dragon Breath deals special damage. My Latios is level 20, so I one-shot both of the Geodudes and move on to the Nose Pass. Surprisingly, it survives, which is kind of hilarious. Anyways, it just goes for Rock Tomb, does almost no damage, a total of 7 hit points, and then after a potion, I knock it out with my second attack. Let's go back to Latias now. The fact that it had to use Struggle to defeat Roxanne is actually an advantage in the next section of the game. Inside Rustturf Tunnel, I have to face the Aqua Grunt that has a Poochyena, and I have Struggle, so I can just knock it out with 2 hits, making this fight simple. From here on out, I am not going to have to use this move anymore. I can rely on Psywave for the next 4 levels, but there is also a better option. Inside Granite Cave, after talking to Steven Stone and delivering the letter, he gives me the TM for Steel Wing, which Latios and Latias can both learn. Unfortunately, I didn't clue into this right away, and I fought some trainers inside the gym using only Psywave. But then I realized I can learn Steel Wing, so this should be enough for Brawly. His first Pokemon is Machop. Now this thing is actually a menace for Latias, but not right now. Steel Wing does what looks like almost half with a single hit, although Machop is going to be setting up Bulk Up, so it takes less damage from physical moves on subsequent turns. That said, its attacks do so little damage, and I'm able to knock it out with 2 more uses of Steel Wing. Next is Meditite. Normally I say this thing can't do anything because it only has Focus Punch to deal damage, but in this case it can actually attack because both Psywave and Steel Wing have imperfect accuracy. Thing is, I would actually have to miss for that to happen, and I don't, getting a critical hit, knocking the Meditite out in only 2 turns. Last is Makuhita. It only has fighting type moves, which are not very effective, and while he does have healing items and a citrus berry, which can get annoying, Latias pulls through with a quick 3-shot using the steel type move. Fighting trainers on the beach, I level up to 20 and get access to Dragon Breath, which I put in the place of Safeguard. This is objectively a mistake. I should be keeping that move for the next gym leader. That said, I might not even need it because Dragon Breath is fantastic. It lets me steamroll the rival's team and make my way into Mauville City. I fight a few of the trainers in the surrounding region, but not as many as I normally do. I figured that Latias is going to be fine against Watson around level 24 or 25. I don't quite make it over the damage rounding threshold, but I'm not going to try and fight extra trainers to get there. Facing Watson at this level with a Cherry Berry is probably going to be enough. Voltorb is first, and surprisingly, Dragon Breath does not do enough damage to one-shot. It strikes back with Spark, luckily not paralyzing me. Then Watson uses a Super Potion, which is an advantage for me, and I knock his Voltorb out with the next 2 hits. Electrike falls to a single hit, and then he sends in his best Pokemon, Magneton. Dragon Breath is doing about a third. I paralyze with my first hit. Then the Cherry Berry cures my paralysis after Thunder Wave, and I use another Dragon Breath. But this one doesn't look like it puts the Magneton in KO range. Latias gets paralyzed, and this is why Safeguard would have been helpful. I could block the status condition indefinitely. Here's the thing though, the Magneton is really not doing much damage. It's either paralyzed or trying to use Supersonic. Latias hits itself, although after everything is said and done, the Magneton does not get a chance to attack once with Shockwave. I still have a massive amount of HP left over for the following Manectric. It's just going for Howl, which I thought was wasting time, but it's actually probably the best thing for it to do, because then Quick Attack does a little bit more damage. I guess it doesn't want to be using a resisted Shockwave. In this case though, Dragon Breath is doing enough damage, and eventually Watson's ace goes down. Okay, time to actually speedrun the Latios playthrough. Dragon Breath one-shots the Machop, the Meditite, and the Makuhita on Brawly's team. Here's where things get a little bit sad. Look at the level I'm at going into the Watson fight. 24, almost 25. I have arrived here at the same level Latias was anyway, after doing all of that training in the early game. If this doesn't prove to you that training in the early game is less efficient than training later on into a playthrough, I don't know what will. Thing is with Latios, I'm playing it second in this run because I figured it was the one with the disadvantage. It is obviously the one with the disadvantage, so I know now to hold on to Safeguard for this battle. As a result, I can block the status condition on the Magneton, as well as on the Manectric, so they don't get a chance to paralyze me, giving Latios an easy victory over the electric type specialist. Now that the levels are even between these two Pokemon, I think it's going to be much more interesting to see how both of them do in the next section of the game. For both of them, I want to collect a bunch of high-priced items, so I'm thinking like these vitamins. There's a Carbos over here, and then a protein here right before I head into Meteor Falls. I've also been grabbing a bunch of extra TMs throughout the run, and then I pass through Meteor Falls to the other side where I can grab a PP up, and then in Rustturf Tunnel by the black glasses, I can also grab an HP up. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to get the TM for Psychic from the game corner, although I don't have enough money to buy it before I face Maxie at the top of Mount Chimney. I essentially only have Dragon Breath for this fight still, but it's more than enough for his team. I can 3-shot the Mightyena after he uses a Super Potion, 1-shot the Zubat, and 2-shot the Camerupt. By the way, notice that it uses Magnitude on me. This is because it has no idea that my ability is Levitate. The AI only learns this by using moves that trigger the ability. So that's one advantage Latias has against any Pokemon with a ground type move. Okay, one last high-priced item. I pick up the charcoal in Lava Ridge Town, and then I head into the gym to face Flannery. Dragon Breath does not one-shot the Numel. I wasn't expecting that. It sets up Sunny Day, she uses a Hyper Potion, and then I knock it out over the next 2 turns, stalling out the Sun. The Slugma is a one-hit, and then Camerupt comes in. I use Protect to stall out the Sun a little bit here, and then I go back to Dragon Breaths and 2-shot her penultimate Pokemon. Last is Torkoal. I go for Dragon Breath. It does massive damage because of a critical hit. Then Torkoal chooses Attract. Now, this is a problem exclusive to Latios. Since it is always a male Pokemon, I cannot set my gender to be female, and that means Attract is useful here. This is why we never see Flannery use this move, because I'm always setting my gender to female. Unfortunately for Latios, it has to overcome its attraction to this strange turtle. Eventually it does, hitting enough times with Dragon Breath to give me another win. I have very little to say before the next gym leader. I'm going to teach Shockwave. I guess I could have done this earlier, but it doesn't help much in the previous section of the game. It's really helpful once we get to Winona, but even then I'm going to have better options available to me with both of these Pokemon. Okay, now let's face Norman. Spin does up first. I'm going to use Safeguard here to prevent it from confusing me with moves like Teeter Dance or Psybeam. By the way, this move also prevents the slacking from using Yawn, although it will not work if Yawn has been used prior to Safeguard, so Latios is already drowsy, then it will still fall asleep. In this case, Spinda uses Facade, doing a decent amount of damage to me. Alright, I'm a little bit worried. Then the Vigoroth comes in and does more damage with Facade, bringing me to half health before I move on to the slacking. Thing is, this Pokemon can't do anything to me because I have Protect. It's rare for me to be able to use this move against Norman, and it feels really satisfying that I can use it here. This is just a matter of time. I alternate Protect and Dragon Breath and knock out his ace. Linoon is last. Dragon Breath does more than half. It paralyzes. Slash does not do enough damage to knock me out, and with that, Latios earns itself the 5th badge. Okay, rapid fire. Dragon Breath is enough for Maxi with Latias. It is also enough for me to defeat Flannery. Then, on my way back to Norman, I did have enough money to buy the TM for Psychic, so I do this right away. Notice that my Latias set is slightly better than it was with my Latios set at this point in the game. Latias fought more trainers with Psywave to prepare for Roxanne, gaining a little bit more money, earning itself Psychic earlier in the playthrough. And this move is of course really good for Norman. I one-shot the Spinda, one-shot the Vigoroth, move on to the Slacking, and while I don't have access to Protect because I only have offensive moves, I can just spam Psychic here and I have a Chesto Berry to wake up from Yawn. Plus my second attack gets a critical hit and Slacking goes down over only 2 turns. Linoon is next. I wake up from sleep and knock it out with only 2 hits. Latias is starting to feel really dominant in this playthrough. And not much is going to change because in the abandoned ship I can pick up the TM for Ice Beam. Obviously it's fantastic coverage and I wanted to teach it right away. I have one physical move on my set which is Steel Wing. It's just kind of there because there was nothing better to put it in its place, but Ice Beam makes sense as a substitute now. I was pretty confident that this wouldn't come back to bite me later. Next in New Mauville I can turn off the generator and earn myself the Thunderbolt TM. I'm going to hold off on teaching this one because Ice Beam should be good enough for Winona and Shockwave will cover her Skarmory. Plus, having access to Shockwave for teams like Sydney and Phoebe later on can really improve results of Pokemon when they struggle because the enemy is using a lot of double team. Before Fort Tree City I have to fight the rival. I'm mentioning him here so that no one complains. He's really easy. He's not going to get mentioned again. Inside Fort Tree City I pick up the TM for Hidden Power. This is going to be useful for Steven, and I think only there. Before then I have access to more than enough coverage to beat all of the other gym leaders. So now let's crush Winona. Latias one-shots the Swablu, and then I say no to teaching Mist Ball because Psychic is better. It's a little bit disappointing that we're not going to see its signature move get used, but I will take some time during this battle since we're just going to one-shot a bunch of other Pokemon to describe how it works. It has a 50% chance of lowering the target's special attack, which is really good, but unfortunately in Generation 3, its base power is 70. In Generation 9, they improved this from 70 up to 95, which would make it useful here, but unfortunately Psychic is just better. The ability to drop special defense is more offensively advantageous than the ability to drop special attack. Okay, so Winona's last Pokemon, Skarmory, I go for Shockwave. It doesn't one-hit, but I tank a Steel Wing easily and knock it out on the next turn. On my way to Lily Cove City, let's just ramble for a moment. These Pokemon are really good after the early game, but the early game is extremely painful. I think Psywave might be one of my least favorite moves to start with in a solo challenge. It gives me flashbacks to using Misdreavus and Mismagius in Generation 2. Both of those Pokemon were awful in the early game. I know eventually I'm going to have to play with Misdreavus in this game, and I'm not looking forward to that. I defeat the rival outside of the department store so that I can access this location later on, but I'm not going to use Substitute right away. My current set with a Person Berry is more than enough to defeat Maxi in the hideout. Matt's basically a pushover at this point in the solo challenges, and so that leads us to the section of the game around Tate and Liza. I do a lot of training here, and I usually use my rare candies before I battle them. Latias reaches level 43, and I am going to use my rare candies here, going all the way up to level 55, but on my way I teach Recover, because this could be useful, so I make the slightly difficult decision to put it in the place of Shockwave before taking on the Psychic type specialists. Okay, here we go. Latias Ice Beam on the Claydol turn 1, and I get a one-shot. Next, I target the Xatu with the same move so that it can't set up Calm Mind. This is also a one-shot. That leaves Lunatone and Solrock on the field. I figured that Ice Beam would be doing decent damage here, and it is doing more than half. Although then a problem occurs, because the Lunatone puts me to sleep, sets up Light Screen, and then starts using Psychic and also Calm Mind so that I do less and less damage to it every turn with my special moves. I have Psychic, Dragon Breath, and Ice Beam, so lacking a physical option here means this fight is going to slow down dramatically. And as the Lunatone sets up more and more with Calm Mind, it's going to be dealing increasing amounts of damage whenever it chooses Psychic. Eventually it gets a critical hit, and that's it for Latios. This is where I get my first reset. And I think if I had Steel Wing, I would have been able to win. Alright, I was punished for deleting it earlier on. I tried again not focusing the Xatu down, instead prioritizing Claydol, Soul Rock, and then Lunatone. This also doesn't work out. I get put to sleep, and then there's 2 Pokemon attacking me every turn, which ends up not being a winning combination. I went back to my previous strategy, and it once again ends up with me fighting Lunatone, the Lunatone having ridiculous stage modifiers, not taking very much damage from every one of Latias's hits, and also Tate and Liza have a lot of healing items, which is really frustrating. It is slow going, but this time they don't get a critical hit, and I am eventually able to knock out their last Pokemon, earning myself the 7th badge after 2 resets. This one is really good. It gives a boost to special attack and special defense, which greatly helps out both of the Latias in the next section of the game. But also, I get the TM for Calm Mind, which is going to supercharge my progress with every other battle. This is why it was safe to use the rare candies prior to Tate and Liza, because once I get Calm Mind, I don't need levels anymore. I can set up basically for free. Still, I am over leveled at this section of the game, so some of the trainers like Archie aren't even a problem anyway. I just one-shot all of his Pokemon. And I figured the same thing would be true for Juan. Love Disc is first. My set is Psychic, Thunderbolt, Ice Beam, and Recover. I haven't taught Calm Mind yet because I didn't really think it would be necessary. It would have helped here against the Kingdra though, because I'm not able to one-shot, I have to 2-hit. But after a single healing item, it goes down. From there, one-shot Celio, one-shot Crawdaunt, and surprisingly, one-shot Whiscash with Psychic. Now, prior to the Elite Four, I was playing way too conservatively with Latias. I go into Meteor Falls all the way to the back chamber and pick up the TM for Dragon Claw. I figured this might be helpful as the same type attack bonus move, but I should have thought things through. What is it going to help against? I have Ice Beam for Drake. That's going to be far better. Anyway, I crush Wally. I'm not going to mention him with Latios. He's so simple with either of these Pokemon. After that, I head back to the department store, teach Substitute to Latias in the place of Psychic, because that move is not helpful against Sydney. So now I'm ready for the league. So now with Latios, we're going to try and catch up, but I don't think that's going to be possible. Look at the timer, 1 hour and 30 minutes. It is hilarious to me. The majority of this time was spent prior to Roxanne. Anyways, my moveset now is Psychic, Shockwave, Dragon Breath, and Ice Beam. It's fantastic. Obviously no problems against Winona. Prior to Tate and Liza, I used rare candies, teaching Recover in the place of Shockwave once again. And then I had another choice to make, which is, do I want to teach Dragon Dance? This move is a little bit weird for Latios. I'm about to get Calm Mind, and I also don't have any physical moves, so I don't think it really makes sense. I'm not sure what the developers wanted you to do with this move. I don't get any physical moves through Level Up, and I have limited selections through TM and HM. Now I could have paired this with Shadow Ball for Tate and Liza, but I didn't want to go out of my way to pick up that TM with either of these Pokemon, because I figured it would just sacrifice too much time. Maybe I'm making the same mistake again. How is Latios going to do without a physical move against Tate and Liza? Well, here's the answer. I have a shiny Poochyena, which is really cool to see. Hilariously, this has an effect on the battle which I didn't even recognize. I one-shot the Claydol with Ice Beam, and the Xatu is not going to attack Poochyena because it has a Psychic type move. So Poochyena actually does damage here. It's inconsequential. I'm not going to reset or anything like that. Although, it is kind of funny that the Poochyena is going to survive this battle unless the Soul Rock attacks it, because it's the only Pokemon that can deal direct damage to Dark types. It does end up knocking the Poochyena out, and then it's a 2 vs 1. But interestingly enough, they sent in Lunatone before the Soul Rock in this fight, so it never got much time to set up. As a result, this battle ends up being much easier with Latios when compared with Latias. For Juan, I have taught Calm Mind. I have Psychic, Dragon Breath, and Ice Beam, although this is not the correct set. I think Thunderbolt over Psychic or Dragon Breath makes far more sense. Either way though, it doesn't matter. I just set up with Calm Mind until I use my Person Berry. This gets Latios to +2, and then I sweep all of Juan's team, including the Kingdra. Prior to the Elite Four in Victory Road, I can pick up another TM for Psychic, so I can always relearn this move later on if I need to have it back for some challenge later into the game. But I don't think that's going to be the case. Feeling confident about this, I teach Latios Substitute in Psychic's place, and now it's time for the Elite Four. Okay, are you ready to watch Latias be completely dominant? I hope you are. So the Mightyena has Crunch, but in Generation 3, this move is special. So as I set up with Calm Mind, it will do progressively less and less damage. Then at +3, I know the Mightyena is going to choose Roar, which has lower priority, so I'm going to attack it and knock it out using Thunderbolt. From there, one hit the Shiftry, one hit the Cacturn, one hit the Crawdaunt, and one hit the Absol. Substitute is also great against Phoebe. I can block Curse, I can set up here for free with Calm Mind against the weak first Dusclops, although it does have Shadow Punch, which is physical, so it breaks my Substitute, and then I just go on a spree with Thunderbolt, knocking out the remaining Pokemon she has. Although the Ace Dusclops is very defensive, it survives a hit on a sliver of health and uses Shadow Ball. But Latias is a legendary. It survives with red health and still takes the win. Okay, Substitute, still good against the Elite Four. Set up on the Celio, it does have Ice Ball, which will do progressively more damage just like Rollout, and it is super effective, so I can't take too much time here. Although Celio chooses Body Slam, good job. This is not what you should be doing. I set up twice with Calm Mind and then sweep her team. Last is Drake, and this strategy continues to work. Substitute Calm Mind for setup, and Thunderbolt and Ice Beam is like the perfect set for the Elite Four. The Shelgon is essentially useless, I get set up to +2, and then Drake's team is a series of one-hits just like all of the other League members. In this case, Dusclops is feeling really proud about itself. It was the only Pokemon to survive a single hit. But what about the champion Wallace? Well, this strategy continues to be useful with one minor modification. The Wailord likes to use Water Spout, so you can attack it first turn to lower its damage, although it also likes to use Rain Dance, so I can take this time to just set up with Calm Mind mitigating damage from special moves. Plus, I'm also realizing here that it's not going to choose Water Spout since I resist that move. It is instead going to be going for Blizzard, which is far more inaccurate and it only has 5 PP. I set up to +2 and I figured this would be enough. Although some of Wallace's Pokemon are quite defensive. The Tentacruel, for example. It has a ton of special defense, and I don't have Psychic, so I'm going to be doing a little bit less damage using Thunderbolt, but it is still more than enough. Milotic is another specially defensive Pokemon, but Thunderbolt still gets the job done. Gyarados' Intimidate is irrelevant. Ludicolo survives an Ice Beam. Okay, makes sense. This thing is a troll. It's been so annoying throughout this entire year, and it's really annoying today because Wallace spams a bunch of full restores on it, while Ludicolo tries to set up the occasional double team. I had enough with this, so I eventually go for Substitute, set up a bunch more Calm Minds, and then destroy the duck. Last is Whiscash, but it doesn't stand a chance. Okay, so the league was really short. Let's just go straight for Steven Stone. I played conservatively here, grabbing the leftovers as well as some additional rare candies, so I'm able to get Latias to level 66 before the battle begins. Now my current moveset is slightly risky. Hidden Power Fire, Thunderbolt, Ice Beam, and Calm Mind. The reason this is risky is if Skarmory chooses Toxic while I'm trying to set up, I will just lose. What I'm hoping for is Steel Wing or Spikes. Turn 1, it goes for the Steel type move. I get set up one more time. It then chooses Spikes, and with that, I felt like I should attack. Thunderbolt knocks out Steven's lead in one hit. Aggron's next. This thing's going to give me another opportunity to set up because it has terrible moves. It can't attack with Earthquake, and so it's left with only Thunder, Solar Beam, or Dragon Claw. All moves that are not very good against Latias, especially when used by an Aggron. I guess Dragon Claw is super effective, but it is special, remember that. I get set up to +3, then he switches his Pokemon out into Metagross when I was choosing Hidden Power Fire, but at +3 I just barely don't have enough damage. Still, I move first on the next turn and knock it out. Aggron comes back in, Steven uses another full restore, I finish it off with 2 more hits, and from there, things are easy. Calm Mind to set up a little bit more on the Cradily, Ice Beam 1 hits from +4, Claydol is less defensive so it goes down in 1 hit, leaving only Armaldo. Does Ice Beam have enough damage? And the answer is yes, it does. Latias clocks in with a time of 1 hour 42 minutes and 5 seconds, with 2 resets, 1 blackout at level 67, with a game time of 6 hours and 28 minutes. By the way, right now I'm realizing that I forgot to mention the 1 blackout that I had. It happened around 15 minutes, and while I technically didn't black out, it essentially functioned as a blackout. I lost with Latias, I had an HM user, I just walked back to the Pokemon Center and healed up. I felt like it was only fair to count this as a blackout since my HM users did allow me to walk back to the center. If I didn't have them, I would have blacked out. I don't know, that's kind of an edge case scenario. I do think that it is a fault overall. Maybe this is a loss that isn't a blackout or a reset. It's some kind of new third category that I've never thought about before. Either way, for coherence, I'm just going to count it as a blackout today. Alright, so what about Latios? And the answer is, it's basically the same as Latias. It stomps Sydney, Phoebe, Glacia, and Drake. I don't really have anything additional to say strategically. Substitute plus Calm Mind and 2 special moves. And I mean 2 special moves. It didn't seem to matter that I wasn't running Thunderbolt and Ice Beam. Dragon Breath and Ice Beam seemed like a fine combo as well. For Wallace, I do teach Thunderbolt, and it helps here, I guess, but he's also just as easy as he was with Latias. This might be the most painful playthrough I have ever done that is going to have 0 resets. I don't think Latios is going to lose to Steven Stone. To ensure that that doesn't happen, I came into the battle with a slightly more conservative set. Substitute, Calm Mind, Hidden Power Fire, and Ice Beam. This way Substitute can block Toxic, and I can set up with Calm Mind just a little bit more to improve my damage ranges against his later Pokemon. By the time the Skarmory breaks my Substitute, I have +4, and I figured this would be enough. Hidden Power Fire one-shots the Steel type in a single turn, it continues its spree, one-shotting the Aggron, and then Metagross comes in, and it's also a one-hit. Okay, this is going to be simple. Ice Beam takes care of Cradily and Claydol, leaving only Armaldo, but it isn't defensive enough to survive either. Latios clocks in with a time of 2 hours, 8 minutes, and 4 seconds, with 0 resets, 0 blackouts at level 64. It had a game time of 8 hours and 17 minutes. Okay, I feel like I need to address what I said at the beginning of the video about these Pokemon being awful. They're not actually awful, like, they're really good in Pokemon Emerald. So maybe the better way to describe them is these feel like the 2 most unfortunate Pokemon to solo run. The fact that Latias starts with only Psywave and Wish does cause it problems in the early game. It has to waste time getting Struggle for Calvin, and then it doesn't really have good options against Roxanne. And here in the timeline graph, you can really see that reflected. Outside of the fact that I had some struggles against Tate and Liza without Steel Wing, the first split of the game was the most challenging. And for Latios, it's even worse. Almost half of the time it's spent in the playthrough is just to beat Calvin. Calvin, the first youngster in the game. While Latias might be unfortunate having only Psywave for the early game, Latios is even more unfortunate. The fact that they gave it Memento as a starting move is just terrible. Of course, you're supposed to obtain them at higher levels because they are roaming legendaries. So in regular playthrough, this isn't a problem. It's just a problem within this weird arbitrary format. That said, I think it's really interesting that these 2 Pokemon exist. They've given me a new category to talk about in terms of solo runs. This is a Pokemon that gets a bad time in the game, but is fantastic at defeating all of the trainers. Latias had problems only because I made player errors against the Nincada earlier on, and then Tate and Liza not having Steel Wing. Latios didn't struggle at all. It just crushed everything. It's very rare for me to get a first playthrough with no resets or blackouts. This means Latios is very intuitive to play in a solo challenge. I'm really disappointed that these Pokemon don't start with better moves. Imagine if they got Dragon Breath as a starting move. They would be absolutely off the walls broken for a solo challenge. But starting with Psywave is absolutely terrible. And it's actually worse than you might think. You know the gym leader that's second in the game, Brawly? He's a fighting type specialist. I didn't really talk about him much in this run because he's pretty simple. He's actually a major threat for Latias specifically. In my attempts to optimize these playthroughs, I realized that I could get through Roxanne at a lower level. I don't need to do so much training for her. Psywave is just more than enough. I also don't need to spam up my PP prior to the battle. I can just fight her and reset quickly if I run out of Psywaves or get really bad luck. That approach is faster than going back to the forest to find a cocoon to spam out all of my moves. Thing is, this has a consequence. By the time I arrive at Brawly, I'm at a really low level. It seems like with Psywave, it's a psychic type move, I shouldn't have any problems, but the Machop is just absolutely awful. The fact that the Machop likes to set up with Bulk Up and Steel Wing then can't do very much damage just makes this fight spiral out of control. Plus, Machop can deal consistent damage. It's either setting up and doing a lot with Karate Chop getting occasional critical hits, or it's dealing direct damage with Seismic Toss. So here's my proof that Latias should level up in the early game. Watch me lose to Brawly 5 times in a row with this psychic type. I tried using Psywave on the Machop to get lucky and knock it out. This sometimes works and I make it to the Makuhita, but then everything just falls apart there. Sometimes though, the Machop just gets me and I never even make it to the Metatite. This was so frustrating, and also I'm not going to take a playthrough that has this many resets as my follow-up run, so I decided to restart and try the whole playthrough again. Prior to Roxanne, let's look through the damage ranges against Brawly. This is the most important thing to understand about Latias' early game. It all comes down to the fact that Psywave is trash and I'm basically relying on Steel Wing. Let's start looking through these damage ranges at level 13. Note that these are not exact because I'm going to be using rare candies to level up from this point, leaving some EVs on the table, so my damage ranges would be slightly better than this if I had fought wild Pokemon or trainers. Just keep that in mind, but these ranges will still give us a sense for how well Latias does at different damage rounding thresholds. At level 13, Steel Wing has a 12.9% chance to 3-hit the Machop, and this is when it hasn't used Bulk Up. You'll also see that I only have a 10.4% chance to knock out the Makuhita in 3 hits. Luckily, the Meditite is a 63.1% chance to 3-shot. At level 15, these damage ranges are much better. Roughly a 75% chance to 3-hit the Machop, a 75% chance to 3-hit the Meditite, but only a 13% chance on the Makuhita. And the guarantee that the router is spitting out at me is a 7-turn. That is just not acceptable. We're going to go off levels one by one, so watch these damage ranges if you're really curious. At 16, they improve. At 17, they improve again, giving me a 46% chance on the Makuhita for a 3-hit. But at 18 over the next damage rounding threshold is where things feel much better. I have a chance to 2-shot the Machop, I am more than likely going to 2-hit the Meditite, and I have a 75% chance on the Makuhita to 3-hit. So I think there's a chance that you could get by Brawly at a very low level, but it's unlikely, and with my experience, I didn't want to play for that. It takes too long to get to him in each playthrough, so I felt going for a safe option made the most sense. I essentially fight every trainer in the early game, fighting Roxanne around level 14 or 15, then I continue grinding all the way to 18 before I take on Brawly. This makes him very simple using Steel Wing, and from there Latias is unleashed. The damage ranges for Watson are a little bit important. Knocking things out more quickly at level 28 does help, though it's not strictly required. Although since I did a bunch of training in the early game, getting to this level isn't that hard. I've also kept Safeguard so he can't paralyze me, and that makes this battle very straightforward. If I focus on picking up the right items, then I can get Psychic before Maxie on Mount Chimney. Both Flannery and Norman are simple, and here's where we need to check in with my moveset. Dragon Breath, Psychic, Steel Wing, and Shockwave. I replaced Dragon Breath with Ice Beam so that I can keep Steel Wing for Tate and Liza. Also, just before them, in case the fight gets awful because of a Hypnosis hit from Lunatone, I do teach Recover in the place of Shockwave. That said, it is far less likely for the fight to spiral out of control now that I have Steel Wing. It is a 2-hit on both of the Rock-type Pokemon. And I also have a Chesto Berry so that I can wake up at least once. This time around, no resets for Latias. After this battle for a small portion of the game, my moveset becomes Ice Beam, Psychic, Thunderbolt, and Calm Mind. This lasts until the Elite Four, where I revert to the previous moveset, Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, Substitute, and Calm Mind. We saw how good this set was, and it continues being good into the late game. Here against Steven Stone, note that I did make a mistake. I should be using Hidden Power Fire and Ice Beam together. It gives slightly better coverage and damage against more of Steven Stone's Pokemon. Hidden Power Fire and Thunderbolt together just don't have a lot of synergy, so don't do this yourself. I was really tired when I was doing this playthrough, and I made this one small mistake at the very end. Unfortunately, it causes one reset, which is a combination of the fact that the Skarmory kept attacking me, breaking my substitute, so I had low health, and then I don't have quite enough damage using Thunderbolt or Hidden Power Fire. Okay, a little bit of a blunder from me, but in the end Latias clocks in with a much better third playthrough time. 1 hour, 31 minutes, and 59 seconds, with 1 reset, 0 blackouts at level 64, with a game time of 5 hours and 55 minutes. Okay, here's a timeline graphic comparing all of the playthroughs. I did complete 3 Latias playthroughs, and the second one is only marginally better than the first, and then the third is marginally better than the second. The reason I did 3 is because I felt really distracted playing the second playthrough, and I just don't think my inputs and things like that were on point enough, so I came back and did another go of it. I am not going to do 3 Latios playthroughs. I hope you can understand why. Because just like the first time around, I have to grind in this tiny patch of grass all the way until level 20. I didn't change anything with my implementation, and you're going to see that reflected in this timeline graphic. The late game is slightly more efficient. I was just able to order my moves better and play the game in a more efficient way. I really didn't change much strategically, other than dropping the Dragon Breath strategy that I used for that run. Instead, I'm using the Ice Beam Thunderbolt in the late game, just like with Latias. How it boils down is that these two Pokemon play identically after the early game ends. From there on out, they just stomp the game. But let's go back to my grinding in the early game. Was I able to find a way to make this slightly more efficient? Well, the answer is no, but I was able to find myself a purple Wurmple. Yes, finally a shiny that isn't Poochyena. Okay, so I'm really proud of myself for this one. I nickname the purple Wurmple perm pull, and I'm sure later on I'm gonna have to use it in a solo challenge, so let me know how you think that should go down. In terms of Latios' second playthrough, I was able to improve its overall time just slightly. It clocks in with a final time of 2 hours, 3 minutes, and 0 seconds. 0 resets, 0 blackouts at level 63, with a game time of 7 hours and 58 minutes. Here's the timeline graphic for all 5 playthroughs I completed for this video. I'm really sad that I had to do 2 Latios playthroughs, but I'm happy that I was able to improve its results, although only by a small amount. It is still in this format dramatically outclassed by Latias. And these two are kind of outclassed by many other Pokemon in Emerald version. To start, let's rank them in my first playthrough tier list. This will be a little bit deceptive, and you're gonna think that these Pokemon are a lot better than they really are from these results. The reason is, this tier list overall is becoming less and less useful for us. A lot of the results are so stale that they just don't stack up well against all of my more recent results. In this case, Latias earns itself the 5th overall spot, just behind Spinda and just ahead of Lunatone. That said, I do want to point out the fact that psychic types are doing really well. There are a lot of them in the S tier of this tier list. Latios, on the other hand, did not do well, but it still beats out Pokemon like Mewtwo and Chimecho, earning itself the last placement in the B tier. If you need proof that my skill has improved dramatically since the beginning of this series, you shouldn't, but I guess this is it. Okay, now time for the more accurate tier list. Although I really need to rebalance the thresholds, they're looking so bad right now. In this context, Latias is not so good. It earns itself the top placement in the B tier, just ahead of Glalie and Sharpedo, 2 other Pokemon that were quite underwhelming. Okay, so this is where the entire thesis of this video finally comes together. I said that Latios was an awful Pokemon. I said something like it was a horrible solo running Pokemon, and I stand by that, because today, with its 2 hour and 3 minute time, it is worse than Ninjask. Ninjask. Do I need to say that again? I hope I don't need to say that again. As a result, it earns itself the only placement in the Bruno tier. Fitting. Latios feels like a Bruno tier Pokemon. I never want to play this thing again in Emerald version. That said, when the first trainer in the game does not have a dark type, these Pokemon are likely going to be better. So I can see them getting at least decent results in a game like Fire Red, when eventually I do those solo runs. But for now, I am happy to be putting these 2 Pokemon to bed. And that concludes the legendary spree of this year. We played 5 terrible legendary Pokemon: Regirock, Regice, Registeel, Latios, and Latias. Next year, I think I deserve to play the game with some legendaries that are actually good. Until then, though, we are going to play a Pokemon that is even worse than Latios, and then at the end of December, I'm going to have to go back to where this all began and re-rank some Pokemon that really deserve it. Here are the run summaries for both Latias and Latios' final playthroughs, just in case you want to play these runs yourself. Although, don't play Latios, play Latias. It's fun, after Psywave is done. If you support me on Patreon or through YouTube memberships, thank you so much. It means the world to me. You keep me doing this, playing Pokemon a ridiculous number of times and getting all of these tiny granular insights that really no one needs, but I think we all want. If you've made it this far, you're incredible. Daily December continues tomorrow. I'll see you then.